Now, before we go watch Jesus plug that fatal flaw, I want to just stay on this idea for just a second about encounters with God. I come up in Pentecostal charismatic churches where encounters with God were considered to be something you were supposed to have every single service, but those encounters were something that were supposed to happen in a highly emotionally charged atmosphere. Shouting, running, yelling, falling down, jumping up and down, spontaneous worship. And listen, I've been in I think every kind of Christian service imaginable and seen a lot of stuff. I can't even really be shocked anymore. I don't think. I've seen some stuff. I say I don't think because there's always somebody coming up with something new. Like, have you seen this? Okay. I could probably do without seeing that. I can imagine. But a lot of our encounters with God were always built around emotional responses. But they happened almost invariably in church. And what I mean by in church, of course, is in service, in the building, in singing, in preaching, in invitation time, worship time. Or they happened in your prayer closet, prayer meetings. And they were almost always accompanied by the outlandish. Because the stories that we emphasized was where God did big stuff. 7 days around Jericho, on the seventh day march 7 times. When you get to the end of the 7th time, put the trumpet to your mouth and blast it as loud as you can, and the walls will come tumbling down. Well, if you build a theology out of that's how God works, you better get loud. Right? You better get loud, you better march, you better move, you better get on your feet, you better get ready, because when God shows up, you want to be ready for what God's going to do. I'm not cutting those encounters down. I saw God do some pretty amazing things in those encounters, but for a long time I thought that's all that God encounters were. That's not where Jesus plugs the fatal flaw. Like on his way to the cross, he doesn't go, I'll tell you boys what, if you really want to see me after this is over, buy a trumpet. And march this thing out, man. And you get to the end of it, blast that thing as loud as you can, and the Holy Ghost will fall, Because that was the kind of way we talked. The Holy Ghost will fall. He gives us some hint. He tells his disciples, if 2 or 3 of you gather together in my name, I'll be there in the midst of you. So he starts to lay some hints out, like, listen, I'm actually going to show up in your midst. But in a world where they had him in the flesh, you can imagine that their first thought was, if we come together in his name, he's going to walk through the wall. Right? Because that's how he did at the end of John. He just walked through the wall. And you can imagine that that's probably what they thought was going to happen even post-Pentecost. Is we have a move of God. Jesus is going to show up in this room. He's going to walk through the wall. And when he does, then we'll know. That's how we'll see God. And yet on his way to the cross, I want you to go to Matthew 25. And I know that when we read stories like the one I'm about to read to you, we always do it, we pretty much do it all by itself. We read this as the sermon. Maybe this is our lectionary reading on a Sunday. We read this and then we preach this sermon. And that's beautiful. That should be done. But for purposes of this message tonight, I want to show you what I think is Jesus patching up that fatal flaw. It's Jesus giving us an opportunity to realize that we get to see God. Matthew chapter 25. And I want to begin reading. We could pick this up about anywhere, but I want to begin in verse 34. And I'm jumping into the middle of a story about Jesus judging the nations, but I'm heading towards what I believe is Jesus fixing this issue. The king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And then the righteous will answer him and say, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in? Or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you?" And the king will answer and say to them, "Surely I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me." Skip to 45, just to put the proper cap on this text. He will answer and say, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And I believe that on the way to the cross in Matthew 25, Jesus fixes the fatal flaw of us waiting on a physical encounter with God by saying, you are going to encounter hungry, thirsty, strangers, naked, sick, and imprisoned people. And when you encounter them, that's me. What I believe Jesus does on his way to the cross is show us that an encounter with God is not just found in a prayer meeting, in a Sunday morning service, in a Friday night clubhouse. An encounter with God is any encounter that we come across his brethren. He said, when you encounter them, what you do to them, you do to me. Encounters with God are not something that we wait in a prayer line for. They're not something that we arrive at through 3 weeks of fasting. They're not something that we get because we bring in a powerful evangelist, or he preaches our favorite sermon, or they sing our favorite song. Encounters with God are every time we encounter his creation on this earth. And we walk into the lives of those around us, those hungry, those poor, those strangers, those naked, those prisoners. And what we do in that moment is what we do with God. The reason I say that's Jesus plugging the fatal flaw is because that empowers Christianity to be real and relevant every single place it would set its foot for time and eternity. That everywhere a man or a woman claimed Jesus and they laid their foot on the ground, they would encounter another human. And when they did, they had an opportunity to serve. And if they walked past that opportunity, they walked past that opportunity to see their Creator. But if they accepted that opportunity and they picked up the mantle of their brother's responsibility, the stranger, the hungry, the thirsty, the imprisoned, the naked, and all of the things that those things could mean, not just literally, but spiritually and emotionally and physically, and all of the things that they could mean, and we take it serious, we have a chance to encounter God. When you encounter them, you encounter him. Because you're not going to see Jesus with his nail-scarred hands, but you are going to see Jesus naked and hungry and thirsty. And Jesus said, you're going to look at me and go, when did we ever see you that way? We don't see you that way. He goes, when you do it to the least of them, you do it to me. Because the image of my Father is found in the eyes of those that you see.